Hey, my name is Joel Estrada, and this is...
I'm Kingsley Arbitrary.
We're going to be doing Chapter 5 from the book, A Sociological Understanding. And my part of the presentation will be focusing on trying to understand theories of crime. And from there, we're going to start talking about how we used to see it, which was with theology, and how it moved into science.
And then I'll be talking about the neoclassic perspectives, types of deterrence, and just the different type of theories in the neoclassical perspectives.
All right. So understanding theories of crime. There are three questions theory of crime tries to answer. The first one is, why are some individuals more likely than others to commit crime? The second question is, why are some categories or kinds of people more likely than others to commit crime? And the third question is, why is more crime common in some locations than in other locations? Biological and psychological explanations tend to focus on the first two questions, whereas neoclassical and sociological explanations tend to focus on the last question. There are different ways in which theories of crime differ. Neoclassical explanations, as we shall soon see, assume that criminals act with free will, whereas the other explanations assume that people are influenced to commit crime by certain internal and external forces. Let's remember that biological and psychological explanations try to answer the first two questions, whereas the first two questions that place the causes of crime inside the individual, whereas sociological explanations tries to answer the last question, and they place the causes in the social environment outside of the individual. We can also look at it in another way. Biology and psychology focus on the micro or smaller level, and sociology tends to focus on the macro or larger picture. This difference reflects long-standing differences in understanding human behavior. The approach you favor or choose depends on whether you think it is more important to understand the smaller picture or the larger one. A good example of differentiating between micro and macro levels is the one the book illustrates. Psychologists say that low self-esteem, inferiority, low self-control lead women to become anorexic or bulimic, and medical research say it is due to biochemical imbalances. Sociologists, however, say that cultural emphasis on slender bodies, such as Barbie dolls or women in magazines, may lead women to believe they are heavy and need to diet. This approach or explanation locates the roots of eating disorders more in society than in individuals who are anorexic or bulimic. So if the roots of crime are biological and psychological problems inside of the individual, then to reduce crime, we need to correct these problems. If the roots of crime instead lie more in criminologic features of the social environment, then new criminals will always be emerging and the crime problem will continue unless we address these features. With that said, we're going to move into theology to science. And we're going to look at God and science as causes of crime and deviance. In the Western societies long ago, religious explanations for behavior that violated norms, it said that people in ancient times were thought to act deviantly for several reasons. The first reason was God was testing their faith. The second was God was punishing them. The third was God was using their behavior to warn others to follow divine rules. And the fourth was that they were possessed by demons. That was from Makagi in 2008. There was a certain group of people who were a focus to the ancient times and through the Middle Ages. These people were witches. Religion dominated in the Western time and through the Middle Ages. It is said that there are some biblical passages that went against witches. The Catholic Church would kill many of the people who were considered witches. Many of them would be burned at the stake or otherwise executed. Religion was used to explain norm-violating behavior, but it was also used to explain natural, physical, and social phenomena too numerous to mention. Science was certainly not unknown in the West, but it played a secondary role to religion as people sought to understand the social and physical worlds around them. They widely believed that God controlled all human behavior and that the church's authority was to be accepted without question. Although they learned these basic beliefs from childhood as part of their normal socialization, it was also true that the persecution of alleged witches would have made people afraid to question the primacy of the church. Regardless of the reason, religion was the ruling force during the Middle Ages, and science was hardly even mentioned. This all changed during the time of reason, which is the Age of Reason. This period marked the ripening in Europe, which is with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment developed a new way of thinking about natural and social phenomena that eventually weakened religion's influence. Enlightenment philosophers included René Descartes, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean Rousseau, all of whom are still read today along with many others. The views of the Enlightenment philosophers differed in several important respects. For example, Rousseau thought that human nature was basically good, Hobbes thought that human nature was basically bad, and Locke thought it was neither good nor bad as people were born with a blank state and thereafter shaped their experiences in social environments. Yet as the Enlightenment philosophers, they shared certain fundamental assumptions that helped shape the classical school of criminology. Although these and other Enlightenment views represented significant advances beyond the philosophy of the Middle Ages, this more enlightened way of thinking did not extend to the criminal justice system. Europeans suspected of crimes during the Age of Reason were often arrested on flimsy evidence and imprisoned without trial. Torture was commonly used in continental Europe to force people to confess to their crime and to name anyone else involved. In England, the right to jury trials for felonies should have lessened the use of torture. However, English defendants convicted by juries risked losing their land and property to the king. Many defendants thus refused jury trials, only to suffer a form of torture known as pressing, in which a heavy weight was placed on the defendant's body. Some were crushed to death instantly, but others lasted a few days until they either confessed or died. If they managed to die without confessing, the families kept their land and property. That's from Roth, 2011. So the punishment for a particular crime might vary widely, with some people receiving severe penalties and others not being punished at all. Poor people who could not afford to bribe the judges were at a special disadvantage. And almost in conclusion here, the classical school of criminology. Cesar Beccari wrote a small, path-breaking book on crime. Beccari stressed he helped found what is now called the classical school of criminology, also called utilitarianism. In focusing on certainty and swiftness, Beccari explicitly minimized the importance of the severity of punishment, which he thought far less important than the certainty of punishment for deterring crime. As he put it, the certainty of a small punishment will make a stronger impression than the fear of one more severe. If attended with the hopes of escaping, Beccari is widely regarded as a father of modern criminology. The other great figure of the classical school was English philosopher Jeremy Bentham. Like Beccari, Bentham felt that people weigh whether their behavior is more apt to cause them pleasure or pain, and that the law was far more severe than it needed to be to deter such rational individuals from behaving criminally. His writings inspired changes in the English criminal law in the early 1800s and helped shape the development of the first modern police force in London in 1829. They also influenced the creation of the modern prison. Before the time of Bentham, Beccari and other legal reformers, long-term incarceration did not exist. Jails were intended only for short-term stays for suspects awaiting trial, torture, or execution. The development of the prison in the early 1800s thus represented a major and still controversial change in the punishment of crimes. The last thing is the rise of positivism. Classical scholars largely failed to recognize that forces both outside and inside individuals might affect their likelihood of breaking the law. This view was the central insight of a new way of thinking, positivism, which came to dominate the 19th century and derived from the great discoveries in the physical sciences of Galileo, Newton, and others. These discoveries indicated to social philosophers the potential of using science to understand not only the physical world, but also the social world. French social philosopher Auguste Comte founded the positive school of philosophy. Comte argued that human behavior is determined by forces beyond the individual's control. Biologists and psychologists generally locate these forces inside the individual, whereas sociologists find them outside the individual. Research in biology, psychology, and sociology that attempts to explain what causes crime is all positivism and is orientation, even though these disciplines' perspectives differ in many other ways. The rise of science as a mode of inquiry was cemented in 1859 with the publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, in which he outlined his theory of evolution, and in 1871 with the publication of his book on human evolution, Descent of Man. The idea that science could explain the origin of development of the human species was revolutionary. It spawned great controversy at the time of Darwin's publications and is still attacked today by people who accept the biblical story of creation. However, Darwin's theory eventually dominated the study of evolution and also established the credibility of science for understanding human behavior and other social and physical phenomena. That concludes my part. I will now hand it over to Kingsley, who will go ahead and continue and finish up with the presentation.
All right, so now we'll be talking about the neoclassic perspectives. Why do we say neoclassic perspectives? Because they all ultimately rest on the classical views that criminals are normal, rational individuals who commit crime after calculating the potential risk and rewards of doing so. There are three types of theories in the neoclassic perspectives. They are rational choice theory, deterrence theory, routine activity theory, and they're all considered close cousins with certain different emphasis that ultimately all manifest the classical views. Okay, so first, the rational choice theory. It assumes that potential offenders choose whether to commit a crime after carefully calculating the possible risk and rewards. This means that if an individual commits a crime after deciding if the rewards outweigh the risk and do not commit the crime after deciding the risk outweighs the reward. One of the philosophers, Gary S. Baker, said there are several factors that come up in the decision making. One, there are possible opportunity for earning money for legitimate occupations. Two, the amount of legitimate that they might earn. Three, the amount of money they might gain from committing crime. And four, the possibility of being arrested. Cornish and Clark in 2001 distinguished the difference between involvement decision and event decisions and focus more on the later than the former. Event decision has 5 stages. 1 is preparing to commit a crime, 2, selecting the target, 3, committing to the crime, 4, escaping, and 5, aftermath of the crime. Involvement decision has 3 stages. Committing the crime for the first time, which is the initiation, continuing to commit the crime, habituation, and 3, ceasing to commit the crime, the dissidence. Rational choice perspectives have made a valuable contribution to understanding event decisions, which criminological theories have previously neglected. This perspective emphasizes 2 related concepts: situational factors, which is the aspect of immediate physical settings, such as street lights or presence or absence of surveillance cameras. 2, the opportunity that exists or fails to exist for an offender to commit a crime without fear of arrest and or any negative consequences. According to Cornish and Clark, this emphasis in turn leads to the rational choice perspective to regard criminals as not being different from non-criminals. Studies of active robbers shows that they often plan their crimes by taking into account the chances of being caught and in their chances of being put in danger by the victims who decide to resist to the crime. Deterrence theory. It assumes that potential and actual legal punishment can deter crime. There are 6 types of deterrence. First one is absolute deterrence, refers to the effect of having some legal punishment. The law is a very strong deterrence in the criminal justice system. If it didn't exist, crime will also be much higher. Marginal deterrence refers to the effect of increasing the severity, certainty, and the swiftness of legal punishment. General deterrence occurs when members of the public decide not to break the law because of fear of legal punishment. And a good example of that is when we're driving, we'll try to obey the speed limits because we're fear of getting a speeding ticket. Specific deterrence, also known as individual deterrence, occurs when offenders already punished for breaking the law decides not to commit another crime because they don't want to face any more legal consequences. Objective deterrence is the impact of actual legal punishment. And the last deterrence, which is subjective, refers to the impact of people perceptions of the likelihood and severity of legal punishment. Now I'm going to talk about the instrumental offenses, and those are crimes that are committed for material gain with some degree of planning. Expressive offenses are crimes committed for emotional reasons with little or no planning. Example, when you're angry at someone, you might violently grab the person. The pessimistic appraisal of the expected size of marginal deterrence effects comes more pessimistic. First, arrest and imprisonment have become so common in the United States, especially among young males in large cities. Scholars think that sanctions have lost the stigma that used to have. Second, arrest and imprisonment have been found to increase the feeling of masculinity of urban youth. They become more macho and they are more likely to reoffend for that reason. And third, it increases penalties and other deterrence-oriented criminal justice policies are not always implemented as legislators might have expected. Prosecutors might not charge an offender with the maximum charge because of prison overcrowding. The fourth one is the chances of arrest and imprisonment are so low that it would be surprising if the legal sanctions did not have high deterrence impact. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about difference between certainty and severity. Certainty of punishment is the likelihood of being arrested, and the severity of punishment is whether someone is incarcerated, and if so, how long. System capacity argument are areas with high levels of crime have lower arrest rates for two reasons. Their police are extra busy, and the police also realize that too many arrests will overburden the criminal justice system. A third and very influential neoclassic perspective is a routine activity theory. It assumes that the crime is more likely when three factors are simultaneously present. One, motivated offenders, two, attractive targets, and three, in absence of guardianship such as police, bystanders, or even a dog. Lawrence E. Cohen and Marcus Felsen introduced the routine activity theories in 1979. Situational crime prevents major contribution in routine activity theory at rational choice theory places of efforts in specific locations to aim to reduce exposure to motivated offenders, increase target suitability, and increase capable guardianship. Efforts to reduce crime increase lighting and surveillance cameras on city streets or in public parks, and providing and installing better security cameras for motor vehicles, commercial buildings, and homes. Hotspot policing also helps because it's pretty much just having the police patrol high crime areas. So that's all for the neoclassical perspectives. Pretty much you have your rational choice theory, your deterrence theory, and routine activities theories. And then your deterrence, there are 6 types of deterrence: the absolute deterrence, marginal deterrence, general deterrence, specific deterrence, objective deterrence, and subjective deterrence. Thank you. That has been our presentation on Chapter 5. This is Joel Estrada, and I'm Kingsley Overcherry. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. You guys have a great day.